Right then. Good evening, everyone. How are you? Hot? So, firstly, I just wanted to sort of say well done for making it of this new, earlier time. 5:30. Incredible. A whole room full of planners, all on time. And also, well done to everyone that wrote an APG paper and those that got shortlisted. I think it's just released today. So, round of applause for everyone, because it's an extraordinary achievement. And if you haven't checked it out, who made it yet, then you should do. There's some awesome papers there. So this is a very special event, a very special day for the Noisy Thinking event. It's hosted free by the APG. Tonight we have one speaker. Usually we have 2 or 3 or 4. Tonight we've got one. He's going to be grumpy, which I'm looking forward to. And there are over 150 of you here tonight. There are apparently over 188 people that couldn't be here tonight. So it's a measure of how lucky we all are to be here to hear John and what he's got to say, I think. And those figures tell their own story. So I think that's testimony to 3 things. So John is a man who needs very little introduction. Secondly, it shows that I think planning is in really rude health right now. And it's a great time to be a planner. And I think that's an interesting thing for John to ponder on as we go into the grumpiness. And thirdly, it just shows that you can't really resist other people being grumpy, especially on stage. It's just a really fun thing. So I'd like to say a couple of words of thanks before we kick into this thing, as people still come in. It's great to see. So firstly, thank you to Google. This is still an awesome space, definitely one of the best in London. It's a great privilege for us to be able to congregate here. It's a very special place. I'd also like to say thank you to Flamingo for their continued support for the Noisy Thinking events. Much appreciated. And we have a little video to press play if you can. So thank you to Flamingo, our sponsor. Now, before we start getting grumpy, so I think there's a couple of things that is worth just sort of saying about John, really, because he is a legend. So to say he's had a stellar career would be a massive understatement, I think. So firstly, he got a first in geography. I mean, who does that? He has a first. He then managed eventually to find his way into BMP, the home of planning, arguably, and became, astonishingly, the youngest ever board member that they had, aged 26. 5 years later, only 5 years, he became head of planning at GSP over in the States, could be Silverstone, and he soon became a partner and a vice president before becoming the CSO at George Patterson, Young and Rubicon in Australia. Oh yes, he also masterminds the WPP Fellowship Programme. So literally his planning influence is global in scope. And somewhere in between all of that, he's managed to write 2 books. And just out of interest, who has read his books? Hands up. Okay, a fair few. So you will already know that they are planning Bibles, essentially. One on developing ideas, Truth, Lies, and the Art of Advertising, and one on selling them, Pitch Perfect. Both brilliant books in different ways. If you haven't read them, I urge you to read them. He's also more than a brilliant strategist. So apparently the definition of a guru is someone that has experiential wisdom, who transmits from teacher to pupil. And I think that John more than fulfills that criteria. So, Guru, we're very lucky to have you here this evening. No doubt we'll all expect a strong dollop of wisdom in amongst the grumpiness. Everyone give a very big hand to the one, the only, the legendary John Steele.
Yes. Thanks very much, Dom. It's always worrying to me when people applaud before the start of a presentation. I much prefer it when it happens at the end, because you may, I don't know, are the 188 people who are not here tonight the lucky ones? I'm not sure. I actually didn't raise my hand when Dom asked who's read John's book. I wrote it, but had I not written it, I wouldn't have read it. Anyway, I'm John Steele. It took a while, didn't it, for that one to... I'm John Steele, and I used to be a planner. Early in my career, as Dom said, I spent 5 very enjoyable years as a planner at BMP in London. I then spent 10 more in what I thought at the time was the best job in the world as planning director at Goodby Silverstein and Partners in San Francisco. I'm now, according to my business card, group planning director at WPP. But although the word planner still appears on my business card, it feels, I don't know, a little inaccurate. I recruit planners, I train planners, I advise and mentor planners, I talk about planning in client meetings and at events like this, but I don't really do it anymore. I don't work full-time on account. I'm not immersed in clients' business in the way that I used to be. I don't go out with sales reps into the trade. I don't work with innovation teams on developing, naming and packaging new products. I don't understand the production process. I don't talk with designers and factory workers, and I don't get into the nitty-gritty of pricing or distribution strategy. And I'm also not spending the time that I used to out in the real world. I'm not out there talking with beer drinkers or car drivers or milk users or gamers or voters, the people who buy or use my clients' or competitors' products or buy into their ideas. Now, there was a time when I was doing all of those things, and I had a lot of knowledge that I could apply to any new brief, any question from a client, any question from any request from one of my creative teams. But I don't have it anymore. And in my opinion, that means I don't really have the right to call myself a planner. But at least I have a good excuse, because my job with WPP requires me to do things that have removed me from the day-to-day. I'm now paid to manage and to lead and to train and occasionally to pontificate. But others don't have that excuse. And I think that around the world today there are a lot of planners, and I'm not talking about all planners or all agencies, but I'm talking about a lot of planners in a lot of so-called planning agencies who are supposed to be planning day-to-day but are not. And they also, in my opinion, have no right to call themselves planners. So this year I'm going to be 54 years old. I can't believe that I'm standing on a stage saying, this year I'm going to be 54 years old. I guess that's pretty old for the agency business, although I do at least work with Jeremy Bullmore, who still calls me Pup. But I first realized that I was getting old, and this is, looking around the room today, this is an experience that probably not many of you will have had yet. But I first realized I was getting old when one day my wife pointed out of the window and said, "It's raining." And I said, "Oh, but it'll be good for the lawn." It was a terrible moment as I realized what I was saying. And there are obviously a lot of disadvantages to finding myself in an older demographic. When you're scrolling down to enter your year of birth on one of those things online, it takes a lot longer than it used to. And compared to people half my age, I have twice as much to remember. That also takes a bit of thinking about. But on the bright side, checking the box that says that I'm aged 50 to 60 or 54 to 59, however the demographic cake's sliced, does also give me permission to be grumpy about things and complain about stuff that upsets me. And I've got a very, very vivid memory of my crusty old grammar school English teacher once saying to a troublesome pupil, he said, "Collins, you're getting right up my nose, And frankly, there's not a lot of room up there. And I'm now starting to understand what he meant and how he felt, because there are certain things that are starting to get up my ex-planner's nose. And I'm going to stand here and complain about a few of them, not to try to depress you about the discipline. And in fact, I think many of you in the room will probably agree with some of the issues I raise. But as a discipline and as an industry, I don't know, it seems to me that we've sat back over the years and let a lot of bad things happen to us. So anybody in this room who's in a position of influence, and anyone in this room who's going to be in a position of influence, I ask you please start complaining too. Go back to your agencies, complain to your peers, your agency managers, your clients. And number one, first reason why I'm upset is that often planning is no longer the research-based discipline that it used to be. Stephen King, father of planning, Stephen King, the father of planning, not the horror writer, once said that at its best, our industry represents creative imagination subjected to critical control. And back in the late 1960s, when, as you can see, people weren't just black and white, but grainy too, he imagined and he subsequently created a research-based agency discipline that was responsible both for the first intuitive leap and that critical control that he's talking about. At the same time, Stanley Pollitt in Paddington started a planning department at BMP, and he wrote that working alongside the account person on every account, the planner would be charged with ensuring that all the data relevant to key advertising decisions should be properly analysed, complemented with new research, and brought to bear on judgments of the creative strategy and how the campaign should be appraised. Now, in my first 2 years as a planner at BMP, I spent pretty much all the time either analysing Nielsen data or client data or out on the road conducting primary research. I researched new products, new packaging, new retail concepts, purchase decisions, social, economic, cultural trends, and of course, rough advertising ideas. And nothing, and I mean nothing, was ever recommended to a client unless the planner on the account had shown it to representatives of the target audience and was satisfied that it was affecting them in the right way. Sometimes it took a long time to get the work right. Several rounds of creative development and research were conducted before we were all happy, which is why the agency's unofficial motto was late but great. In the more recent past, though, I asked a senior planner at one of WPP's top agencies how he intended to research a new campaign, and he told me with an expression reminiscent of that of a startled cat, "I don't do that." "So who does?" I asked. "Other people," he said. And I wondered, if other people do it, what exactly do you do? I learned that he was incredibly busy. He analysed lots of data, attended numerous meetings, talked a lot. He did also attend or analyse other people's research. But as far as getting out of the office and finding out face-to-face what normal people think of our brands and our campaigns and our categories, that was somebody else's responsibilities. It could be worse. A few years ago, I asked a very well-regarded planning director in the US exactly what he did, because I knew that he worked in an agency where the founder wasn't a particularly great fan of research. And he said, and I quote, "It's my job to look cool, be smart, and hang out with the creative department." Sounds like a most enjoyable job, but it's not quite what I'd define as planning, and probably not quite what most of you would define as planning. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not standing here sort of presenting some sort of planning fundamentalism. I don't believe in making decisions solely on the basis of research. I've never been a proponent of literal applications of research findings to brand strategy or communication development. And I also love instinct and common sense as part of the communication development process when combined with the right information. But you have to start with research. You have to develop hypotheses from something beyond guesswork. And while this should always start with desk research, it should never end there. But today, I'm a little worried that a lot of planners I see have the idea of research and the definition of research as opening up their laptops and starting, hitting the Google icon. So they're doing web searches. And it's sort of ironic that while While our industry seems to be on this never-ending quest to find more innovative and compelling and competitive ways of describing planners, from account planners to communication planners, channel planners, digital planners, creative planners, insight planners, Uncle Tom Cobley and all, in reality, the majority are nothing more than Google planners or Wikipedia planners. And I don't mean to insult our hosts, who do a very fine job of giving us access to a wealth of information. It's just that for planners, it's not exactly the wrong kind of information, it's just not altogether the right kind of information. As planners, I still hold firm to the view that we need to spend the majority of our time away from the office, out in the real world, engaging with real people. We shouldn't be sitting at our desks, we shouldn't be sitting in front of our laptops, we shouldn't be throwing email back and forth all day. You know, we should be out shopping with people and driving with them and eating with them and drinking with them and going shopping with them and going to clubs with them and taking cruises with them. That was a good job when I did that. And yes, I know that to an audience of planners in 2015, it might sound like heresy, but I still think we should be spending more time in qualitative research with them too. Focus groups, the F words. People tell me all the time that focus groups are just 20th century and passé and they're unreliable because people behave differently in research and they don't always say what they mean. But if that's the case, don't conduct your research in those stupid antiseptic research facilities. Bring in groups of people who know each other so that they're actually comfortable in each other's company and don't tell lies. But most important of all, get around the problem of what people say versus what they mean by training moderators properly. Good moderators know when people aren't telling the truth. Good moderators know when there's more to be said. Good moderators know how to get to the truth and get to the places where the real insights lie. And planning departments aren't training moderators the way that they used to or the way that I was trained. And that leads me to a broader point, and it's the sort of second reason to be grumpy, which is that compared to 2 or 3 decades ago, agencies aren't training young planners the way that they used to. That's the way I've built planning departments. You know, just get 2 or 3 good senior people to do the training and then hire a bunch of kids straight out of university and teach them in the environment of the agency and learn their planning skills within that particular culture, within that particular creative environment. But those agencies that are hiring them today are not hiring many, and those that are being hired are very often not being given any kind of formal training. A lot of candidates have told me that they've visited agencies and have been told somewhat pompously by planning directors, oh, we don't, at our agency, there's no such thing as a junior planner. Well, you know, I was a junior planner, and I guess people like Jane Newman and M.T. Rainey and Leslie Butterfield and Charlie Robertson and Damien O'Malley and Lucy Jameson and Peter Field and a bunch of other pretty damn good planners were junior planners. And those junior planners became very good senior planners because somebody took them and trained them and spent months and years making them better planners. It doesn't happen by accident or osmosis. But while the lack of recruitment and training is an issue, I think it's a symptom of a deeper issue. I once heard Lucy Jameson talking about how the medical profession makes an important distinction between the immediate signs of illness or the presenting symptoms, as a doctor would say, and the underlying symptoms, potentially more serious, which actually cause the condition. And what worries me most about the modern trend for Google planning and the lack of investment in recruitment and training of planners is that it's a presenting symptom of a much more serious malaise. Because the third reason for my grumpiness is that agencies' relationship with clients has changed fundamentally since I came into the business. Since I came into the business, another phrase that I have a God-given right to use as a 50 to 60-year-old. But at that time, we still had that elusive seat at the client top table. The head of the account at the agency invariably acted as the consigliere to the client marketing director or chief executive, sitting in on board meetings and management meetings at the client end as an advisor. New members of the marketing department would come to the agency for their briefing on brands. The brands that they were going to work on, they were not briefed by people in the marketing department, they were briefed by people in the agency because the agency were the guardians of the brands. Agency people were frequently seconded to the client. In my first year in the business, I spent 3 months working as a brand manager at Courage Brewing because the client that I worked with got sick and had to take time off work, and it seemed like a natural thing to bring in the planner from the agency to cover for him while he was gone. All of that invaluable experience, but it was a partnership. It was a partnership in which the client always had at least 51% of the equity, but a partnership nonetheless. And as a young planner with hair in the UK in the 1980s, and even as a balding older planner in the US in the 1990s, I think I spent as much time planning on my clients' business issues as I did on the agency's creative and communications process. And in truth, of course, the two were always very closely intertwined. The work I did on one always informed and benefited the other. But somewhere along the way, that changed. And it changed from, I think, from the very earliest moments of a relationship, the very time when clients were seeking pitches from agencies. Because there was a time, back in the dim and distant past, that only about 3 people in this room will remember, when a client wanting a new agency would actually go and visit some. They'd actually go into reception and have a meeting and go and kick the tires and have a lunch and a glass of wine and sit and talk to the people who they might be working with if they ever hired that agency. And they did that with 3 or 4 agencies, and they invited 2 or 3 of them into a formal pitch process, and that usually took about 4 to 6 weeks, in the course of which the client would continue the contact. And they'd see how the work developed, and they'd attend some research, and they'd have a lot of meetings with people from the agency to figure out what the agency's view was on their business issues. And it was all about figuring out which of the agencies they'd most like to work with, which people they'd most look forward to meeting at 8 o'clock on a cold January Monday morning, which group or individuals were most likely to challenge them, stimulate them, solve their problems, and help their careers. Of course, that sort of process also gave the agency an opportunity to figure out the potential of the relationship. Now, when I was a partner at Goodby Silverstein in San Francisco, over the 10 years I was there, we won 90% of the new business we pitched. I've always maintained that the first reason for that success was that we declined 4 out of every 5 opportunities to pitch. And we normally declined the opportunity based on our perception of a client not sharing our values, or not really believing in advertising, or that they'd just be plain unpleasant to work with, and they'd burn up a lot of good people and make life hard for us, and in the end the work wouldn't be that great and it wouldn't be looking too good on our reel, so what was the point? It was much better for us to pitch things that we really wanted and that we believed we could win and that we thought we'd create really good work for. And if we chose to pursue an opportunity, we just threw everything at it. And we wanted it more than the other agencies, and we invested more in it in the other agencies. And 9 times out of 10, we won. But I don't think we'd ever have been able to make those judgments had we not been able to sort of sit down in a room multiple times with clients and get a feel for who they were and how they thought and how they behaved. And then, unfortunately, and this is the 4th reason for my being upset, along came the intermediary, the pitch consultant. And they, in my opinion, have a great deal to answer for in this whole malaise. Now, I suppose depending on who's in the audience and what people might be reporting or tweeting from tonight, this could actually be the last presentation I ever make. But as a 50 to 60-year-old, I'm obviously getting closer to retirement, and as I'm sure my wife would agree, getting a head start on our bucket list wouldn't be all bad. But and I stress personal opinion, not company opinion. There are some. I hope we got that on camera. There are some good pitch consultants out there. I've had friends who are pitch consultants, but even the good ones should not be getting in the way of agency-client relationships, because I think their presence affects far more than the outcome of the pitch itself. Their pitch to our clients is based on efficiency and economy, a promise of managing the process to get more for less. But in that process, they take away the romance. They distance agencies from clients. They create loveless marriages. They promise a level playing field. More often, they deliver the lowest common denominator. And that's where planning starts to suffer. When our revenues are cut, expenditures follow, excuse me, and on what do agencies spend most? People, talent, experience, potential. Throughout my time as a planner, I never worked simultaneously on more than 2 or 3 pieces of business simultaneously. When I ran a department, my planners never worked on more than 2 or 3 pieces. They always worked on more than one. I always hated planners working on just one thing because it doesn't take too long for them to become clients in the way that they look at the business and the way they look at the category and in the way they look at communications as it's being developed. So it always had to be more than one. But anyway, the small number of accounts, if you work on a small number, gives you enough time to really understand your client's business. It gives you enough time to be out there with members of the target audience and also to be there for your account management partners and creative partners in the agency. But as agencies have been forced to cut costs, a lot of planning departments have shrunk. You know, you don't need me to tell you this because I'm sure you're all in planning departments that have shrunk. And that means that the remaining planners have to cover more pieces of business, which means that you can now spend less time on each piece of business, and less time means less time understanding the business, less time out in the real world with real people, and less time to interpret and apply the research to the creative process. And I question whether that represents the value of money that a lot of the consultants and the procurement people are looking for in that pitch process. So that's where it starts, at that very first stage of an agency-client relationship. Before they've even got a relationship, things are being put in place that makes our job as planners more difficult, not to say impossible, if we want to do the real job of a real planner. And I'm not suggesting that it's only planning that's affected by cost-cutting, but I do think planning probably suffers disproportionately because so much of the effect of planning is intangible. Number 6, over the last 10 to 20 years, we've seen a great increase in the number of clients hiring in-house planners. Very large sort of planning and research departments in-house at a lot of the clients I work with now. And a lot of them, excuse me, using external researchers to do the work that previously planners in agencies used to do. Now, a lot of people say, oh, it's a question of trust, it's a question of compliance, it's about the need for objectivity. Well, when I was a planning director, the way I got around that problem was whenever a client said, no, I want our people to do this, or I want our external researcher to do it, I'd say, fine, go ahead, I support that. But at the same time, I would have my planners do their own research, the same research, and we would generally find that our research was a lot more demanding and a lot more likely to say, no, the work's not right yet, and then a lot more useful also in suggesting ways to make it right. So when it happened, we generally saw that in the space of 2 or 3 years, we'd go from doing none of our clients' creative development research because they didn't trust us to doing all of it. But you have to want to do that research. The agency has to want to do it. The agency has to be willing to pay for it. And the agency and the individual planners have to have the time to do it. And not all of those conditions are met. If agencies no longer want to do the research, well, I think that's a pretty sorry capitulation. And they've got to push to do it. Because if they can do it themselves, if planners can do what planners do best, then I think that'll make the work better. As for the time and money, it's not an expenditure. It's an investment in the future of the relationship. And especially with creative development research, it's in everyone's interest for the person conducting the research and conducting and interpreting that research to be the same person who's working in partnership with the client and thus understands the business needs. It makes sense for it to be the same person who's working with and hopefully has the trust of the creative teams. What that research might lack in objectivity, something that's grossly overrated, it certainly gains exponentially in usefulness. So in the years when I was conducting strategic research in person, I knew what kind of information my creative teams needed. And it was usually different information for each of the different creative teams, each of the different creative people. But I could use that research to gather the information I knew those individuals or those teams or those creative directors needed. And I'd also know the form in which I could present it back to them to greatest effect. In creative development research, I'd talk constantly with the teams and creative directors throughout the process, identifying problems, discussing possible solutions, suggesting possible amendments, as we went along. An outsider who's disconnected from the creative process can't do that, and an agency's work will suffer as a result. It needs to be done by people who understand the creative process, understand the business, and understand the individual people who are going to be using the information you gather. So a few days ago, I spoke to a former colleague and friend, a guy who's now creative director for another agency in Australia, in Sydney. And he told me, and this was kind of depressing, he said, we don't get briefs from the planning department anymore. We get them straight from the client. Because the client has exhaustively and expensively researched the proposition, and they tell us this is what the campaign will do, and there's no opportunity for deviation from that direction. And you know, the problem is most clients drink too much of the Kool-Aid. They assume that other people share their level of interest in and enthusiasm for the brand. And I'll never forget a client from Nabisco, this is 25 years ago now in BMP, coming into a room and waxing lyrical about the life-changing, world-changing possibilities of the extra 1/4 millimetre of chocolate on his club biscuit, and the planner turning and saying, it's only a fucking chocolate biscuit. You know, but I think clients need planners with one foot in the business to be fully informed and one foot outside to keep the right sort of balanced perspective. Number 7, there's a very destructive misconception or maybe deliberate confusion between what are two very similar words. One is effectiveness, the other is efficiency. And again, going back quite a long way, in a paper delivered to an AdMap campaign seminar in London in 1990, the late Charles Channon, who was director of studies at the IPA, drew a very important distinction between effectiveness, which is broadly defined as doing the right thing, and efficiency, which is about doing something the right way. So whether we're surrendering to procurement departments or hiring pitch consultants or hiring neutral researchers, I think clients are giving efficiency precedence over effectiveness. As Charles put it in his article, it's a 1/4 century ago, and I think most people at the time thought he was eating the wrong kind of mushrooms. But he said, a real world of difficult decisions and uncertain evidence can be turned into a comfortingly simplified one, where indices of performance are hard facts and acting on them will reduce risk as much as can ever be hoped for. The process that's thus forced on us by pitch consultants and procurement departments doesn't represent an attempt to get things right. It's more about avoiding getting them wrong. And this connects very closely to my 8th bone of contention, which is short-termism. All of these things are related. In part, this is a consequence of the shrinking life expectancy of chief marketing officers. The average tenure in that position today, I'm told, is 2 years. And as a result, a lot of clients are briefing their agencies to affect something, to affect anything, so they can be seen to have an immediate effect, rather than address more important issues that might take longer. Why bother with a 5-year plan when to build a brand when it won't just be your successor, but your successor's successor who's going to reap the benefits if you get it right? I mean, I suppose it makes sense, but it doesn't help. Better to achieve something now and keep the job at least till the next quarterly management meeting. But I'm afraid that we as agencies are accessories to the crime. You know, after all, when your margins are being squeezed, it's sometimes just easier to take the client brief and execute it. But I recently watched 57 campaigns that have been submitted for judging in the integrated category of an award show. Most of them were very interesting and clever and original. But I think only 2 or 3 maybe of the 57 contained any mention of results that I'd regard as legitimate measures of effectiveness. 2 hours I spent watching case histories with supers and voiceovers talking excitedly about thousands of tweets, unique media impressions, driving social engagement, creating a real buzz, starting a movement, new ways to keep the conversation going, likes on Facebook, trending hashtags, hot topic on social media, page views, video views, giving bloggers a reason to get excited. So 2 or 3 years ago, remember this? Everyone in Australia, around the world, seemed to be talking about the best job in the world campaign for Tourism Queensland. Against certain measurable objectives, great success. Massive PR coverage, 34,000 applications for the job, hundreds of thousands of Twitter and Facebook followers. top shelf creative awards, it all came. There was only one thing I never saw in relation to that campaign, which was any evidence that it exerted any influence whatsoever over the number of tourists visiting Queensland. You know, call me old-fashioned, but I'd guess the Queensland Tourism Authority should be responsible for the number of tourists coming to Queensland. Some of you may not know the unfortunate postscript to the Best Job in the World campaign. I always enjoy telling people this when they haven't, because the best job in the world, the winner of the competition to be caretaker of Hamilton Island on the Great Barrier Reef, was an Englishman named Ben Southall. And he went to Australia, did his job. In his last week on the job, he was stung by a potentially lethal irukandji jellyfish while doing a reef survey. Ben survived, which is good news. But the world's media, the very same media whose reporting of the initial job search formed the basis of all the award submissions, gleefully reported his symptoms of fever, headache, lower back pain, chest tightness, and high blood pressure, and noted that other tourists in the not-so-distant past had died from similar stings. All good reasons to take your next holiday in Queensland. It's a great example of how we as an industry often today are creating brilliant solutions to the wrong problems. And all too often, as we and our clients are, are being seduced by the technical possibilities of the digital world, just like dogs licking their balls, we're doing things because we can, rather than because we should. I decided not to put an image of that up on the screen. In saying this, as a member of an older demographic, I know I run the risk of being considered old-fashioned, irrelevant. But I don't think it's either old-fashioned or irrelevant to expect effects like increases in usage frequency or sales volume or share or margin. If someone believes that excited bloggers represent return on investment, then the apocalypse is upon us. And if the answer's always Twitter, it must have been a bloody stupid question. But if we're to be successful in meeting our clients' needs and growing our respective agencies and recapturing the stature of planning in those agencies where it needs recapturing, we have to develop and maintain genuine cultures of effectiveness. And I know that that's something the APG and the IPA follow with great energy. And you're very lucky to be planning in this country rather than many other countries where there are lots of apparently appealing planning jobs going. I mean, if I ever offer anybody a job in Sydney, it's fine there in that one agency, but I'm often, if we have to develop a culture of effectiveness, and it means identifying the real business problems that our campaigns have got to address, persuading our clients to attack these issues rather than gathering cheap likes and hits and visits so they can blind everyone with numbers at the next quarterly executive meeting. And no matter how good an agency you work in and no matter how good a planner you are, I'm sure you've experienced pressure to do that at some point. Now, I'm often asked to talk to conferences and to clients and to agencies about the changes that we've seen and can expect to come in the digital social age. And there have been lots. No doubt there'll be many more. They're all great. They're all exciting. But I sometimes wonder whether it maybe wouldn't be more interesting and a whole lot more productive as an industry to look not at all the things that have changed and be obsessed with the new and the shiny and the different, but to also take into account what hasn't changed and what shouldn't change. Because those things have to do with the fundamentals of human nature. Because as mobile phones have shrunk in size and become more powerful, and our social networks have moved from pubs to computer screens, and we can text and email, and tweet and Snapchat while we're watching television and listening to music. But with all of those changes, some basic fundamentals of human nature have not changed, will not change, and will not change for a very, very long time. And I just wonder if our industry and our discipline have let them go. For whatever reason, we've got to try to get them back. And I be clear again, this isn't intended to be some kind of Luddite rant about going back to the old ways. I'm all in favour of embracing the new. But I'd prefer us to do so while remembering some of the fundamentals. And as planners, it's our responsibility. And I think if we don't do it, who will? In the years that I used to work at Goodby Silverstein and Partners, Jeff Goodby used to introduce me and introduce planning to clients as the agency's conscience. Rich Silverstein, his partner, used a different phrase to describe me and planning. It meant the same thing, but he used to describe us as a pain in the ass. But it was our job to make sure that the agency did the right thing. That a task that's become more difficult, as I've talked about, as revenues have shrunk and departments have contracted and planners' ability to exert a real influence over clients' business has waned. But that cost cutting has also made it difficult for agencies to invest in projects for good. It's made it more difficult. And I wanted to finish by talking about conscience in a broader way. And after all that complaining, to try and end on something a bit more optimistic. I'm perhaps not alone in feeling that I've been an accessory to the crimes committed by business and by government against our planet. It's clear that my success in my job over the years and the success of you in this room tonight in stimulating demand for products and services does continue to contribute to overconsumption and resource depletion and species decline and pollution and climate change. We've all played a role in that. And I know a lot of people who've felt so guilty about that they've quit their so-called capitalist jobs and gone off to work for NGOs and gone to live sustainable lifestyles on remote islands. And that's one approach, and I respect it, and to a high level I'm envious of it. But it's not the only approach, and I'd argue it's not the best approach. Each year I send 2 or 3 of my WPP fellows to work for a month with this organization called the International Exchange in Brazil. I don't know how many of you have heard of them. If you haven't, check them out. It's a great organization. And when my fellows go to Brazil, they apply their communication skills for a month on behalf of an NGO on projects that have ranged from literacy to domestic violence, from rainforest conservation to child homelessness. It's a great program in that it allows marketing communications professionals to do something good while not leaving the business. You can do it in the context of the business. And in the process, they also develop their own leadership skills, and it sort of works out for everybody very, very well. I'll continue to send fellows for placements with the International Exchange. I hope a lot of agencies who haven't got relationships with them establish relationships with them. But I'd also like to urge you as planners in London agencies to find opportunities closer to home, to use your strategic skills to create demand for more sustainable products and practices and to affect the political process where that's necessary. For example, in the last 18 months, I've spent much of my time working with Al Gore and the United Nations on a campaign to put pressure on world leaders to make substantive commitments to carbon emission reductions at the rather snappily named UN Framework Convention on Climate Change in Paris in December of this year. In September of last year, we succeeded in getting 8 young people from around the world to directly address 160 heads of state at the UN Climate Change Summit in New York. And they asked them very simple but piercing questions, not in their roles as politicians, but rather in their roles as parents or grandparents. The idea being, if they won't make decisions based on politics, will they actually do the right thing for their kids and their grandkids? Now, that project involved coordinating 14 different agencies across 4 continents and different disciplines. It worked because we all cared more about the task at hand than we did about who was the lead agency or about any of the politics involved. And money certainly wasn't an issue because we were spending it rather than earning it, so nobody was worried about grabbing that. But while I'm generally grumpy about agencies' ability and desire to commit resources to projects of this nature, it's harder than it used to be. But this experience has also made me optimistic that we might be able to find other ways if we have the collective desire. And that's where I think organizations like the APG and the IPA and D&AD are so important. D&AD, as you may know, has launched its white pencils, Last year, the brief for its New Blood competition was the same brief we were working on for climate change, and the winning team spent a week with us at a workshop with Al Gore. I understand that Leo Raymond's planning an event for September. If he's questioning it at all, he can't now because I've just announced it, as part of the IPA's Purpose initiative, at which he hopes to bring together the brightest minds in the business to figure out ways in which we can help address the climate crisis and related sustainability issues. And again, I hope that some of the brains in this room tonight can be applied to those tasks. But if necessary, outside the existing agency model, maybe across holding company frontiers. And that will be a very interesting part of that gathering, is figuring that out. In the meantime, if you want to help change the agency for the better, and in turn use the industry's power for good, then there's a report launching next Thursday evening, June the 18th, called Reclaiming Agency: How to Save Advertising and Create a Better World. The report shares the opportunity for us as individuals, agencies, and as an industry to take what the writers call the purpose turn, to define and to embody the positive difference that we want to create in the world. And in doing so, maybe we can have more impact with clients, maybe we can tackle some of the world's bigger challenges. And if you do want to know more about this, then please speak to Jonathan Wise, who's sitting in front of me. Stand up so they know who you are. Embarrass Jonathan, everybody. Jonathan, everybody. Okay. If you want a ticket, search for Reclaiming Agency event. That'll throw it up on a Google search for all you Google planners out there. I'm sure some of you here tonight are going to take issue with my complaints about planning and the way it's practiced. You'll feel that you're still adhering to the founding principles of the discipline, that you're helping clients solve the right business problems. And if that's the case, then great. Please keep up the good work. But if not, and if you recognize even a small part of what I've talked about tonight, then please fight it. And be the agency's conscience by making sure it does the right thing for its commercial clients, and that it addresses the right problems, and it approaches them in the right way, and it researches them properly, and it makes sure that what it's recommending is actually going to make a difference. And allow your own conscience to lead you to issues where you can apply your skills for good. Don't be afraid of this, because I think as planners, you've got great power to influence your agencies. You've got great power to influence your clients. You've got great power to influence the broader community. And you've got great power to do it simply by doing what planners do best, which is identifying the real problems and suggesting solutions, by simplifying in a world where we're surrounded by complicators, by bringing humanity to a business that's obsessed with the latest technological possibility, making a difference. If you're doing your job as a planner, you've got that power. And if you're not doing that job right as a planner, because your agency won't let you or because your client won't let you, then maybe it's time to find another agency. Maybe it's time to work with another client who will let you. That's all I have to say for the evening. I've done complaining, and if anybody has any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. But thank you for listening.
Brilliant. I mean, I think there's sort of some really deep, inspiring and far-reaching sort of provocations in there. I'm sure you've all got questions, so I'm sort of going to open it up to the floor, really, in terms of for the next 10 minutes or so. Just
okay.
Feel free to put up your hand and go for it.
First question from the pitch consultant at the front. No, sorry.
One over there.
I have a microphone, so I'm going to go.
Oh, go on.
Hello? You said...
Hello?
I don't know which... Is this Battle of the Microphones?
Hello?
Blue first.
Hello?
Thanks, Lexi.
Hello?
Hi.
You've got a bit of a microphone issue.
Hello?
Oh, you've got the microphone.
I've got it.
Sorry.
I'm going to go for it. So
your lips were moving, and I was hearing the sound from over there.
We're actually the same person.
Very strange. Okay.
You said that the effect of planning can often be quite intangible. Apart from writing effectiveness case studies and all that sort of stuff, what else can we do about that?
Well, I think writing good, easily digestible case studies is the best thing you can do about it. But I think in an agency, it's important for an agency to understand the role that planning plays behind the scenes, and you've got to be able to create that. You've got to be able to play that role behind the scenes to keep on working to make the work right. I mean, you can't write effectiveness awards. There's a lot of agencies where people spend more time writing effectiveness awards than they do doing the planning to make the work effective in the first place. And I'd rather see people spending more time making the planning effective in the first place. And that means doing some of the things that I've been talking about. I think in some of the agencies in London, there's probably a lot more proper planning still going on than I see in other parts of the world. But almost everywhere, agencies are cutting corners. Creative directors who at one time would have said something different are now saying, when a client says, is that the right campaign, or how do I know it's the right campaign? They're saying, trust me, not here's some research that tells us why that's the right campaign. And you've just got to be doing that and making sure the stuff is effective, then writing damn good stories to share that success and make clients believe that what we do as communicators actually can help build business.
Hello? Hello? Is it working?
Okay. Oh, right, at last.
Have your principles on sustainability and looking after the environment cost you anything? Specifically, have you ever, or would you refuse to work on any business within your agency's empire?
There are a lot of things I personally wouldn't work on. I'm not going to name names, but I think you know what they are. And over the years, both my moral compass and that of my partners has cost us an awful lot of money. I know in the years at Goodby Silverstein, we turned down many clients on the basis of just simply not approving of what they did. I've never worked on cigarette advertising. We turned down a very, very lucrative account with an aerospace company where mainly they wanted us to work on planes, but they also make missiles. And we just had this sort of old-fashioned notion that missiles weren't the nicest thing in the world. But I, certainly going forward, there are many clients I wouldn't want to work with. But having said that, and it was a particularly interesting thing working with Al Gore when I work with a company that represents a number of fossil fuel companies, for example. I think I would rather work with those companies and work with them from the inside than try and oppose them from the outside. I think that there's much more opportunity for change if you can get into the company and work with them as partners than there is like demonstrating in the street outside.
Hi. I've got a question around the tension. Already got on. The
I don't
tension
see too
between
good.
your first point and your last point. So absolutely agree that better planning means better connecting with the things that people really care about, kind of going deep to get there. But also we're aware that we should be trying to set an agenda that, around, say, the climate that people don't necessarily want to hear about. So we're in a situation where in 2006 we were all talking about sustainability, and we've just come out of an election where it was mentioned a total of, I think, 3.5 times, because people don't want to hear about it. How do you assimilate those two things?
Well, a lot of people didn't want to hear about civil rights. A lot of people didn't want to wear seatbelts in cars. A lot of people didn't want to give up smoking. A lot of people don't want to wear crash helmets on motorbikes. But there comes a point where you sort of normalise that discussion, and we can do the best work we can on all of our clients' products and all of the issues. We can ignore climate change and sustainability and spend all our time saving rhinos and elephants and tigers and the Great Barrier Reef, but unfortunately at the end there's a bigger issue that's going to affect all of those things. And however well we do those, it's kind of irrelevant if we haven't got a planet to live on. So, I'm just saying that, intellectually and in terms of positioning in companies that have an opportunity to inform people and educate people, we've got an opportunity to do something that most members of the general public don't. The main reason why a lot of people, the majority of people believe that climate change is a problem. Universally in the scientific community, they believe that it's a problem, but there's still a big gap. There's a big gap because people want to do something, but they don't know what to do. And it just seems like such a big problem, there can't possibly be anything that I as an individual can do to change it. There is something that we as individuals can do to change it, beyond putting stuff in the recycling bin or, maybe buying a hybrid car. Because as communicators, we have the opportunity to talk to mass audiences. And if there are ways of people in this room between different agencies collaborating, if there are ways of creating collaboration between different and possibly competing clients, then we should take advantage of that opportunity. And you may not all agree with it, and that's fine, each to their own. But if things like that are important to you, then and agencies say, well, we can't work on that because we're stretched, we're understaffed, we don't have the money for it. Well, let's find other ways of doing it.
For the planners at the sort of beginning of their careers, what training, what particular areas of training do you think we should be asking for from the powers that be?
The powers that be. I think you should be asking for as much training in research as you can get, because I still think that's the essential foundation for anybody planning, both quantitative and qualitative research. For the more complex quantitative stuff, not knowing how to do it necessarily, but at least how to commission it. I think you should be getting creative training. Probably the best part of my training was the time I spent working in the creative department on real briefs, producing really bad ads, but understanding why they were bad. And gradually getting just that little bit better. I think as a good planner, you need to understand what that creative process is about, but also to understand the difference if you're working on briefs between good ones and bad ones. And most of all, I think all of us should be asking our agencies for time away from our desks, to get the time and space to be able to think about things. And to just get out into the real world, not necessarily even to do formal research, but just to observe people, travel on a bus, listen to what people have to say, watch movies, read books. I mean, I've always thought that good campaigns and insights are about combining a brand promise with a broader cultural truth and a deeper human truth. And if you buy into that very simple model in any way, 2/3 of it has to do with being out of the agency. And that's about the cultural parts and the human parts. And if you're not living in the real world, then you're never going to get those. When I was planning director at Goodby in San Francisco, I gave my planners unlimited vacation. There's something to go and ask your powers that be about. And it used to drive, the human resources department would go batshit about it, because every time I hired somebody, I'd say, right, you've got unlimited vacation. And they'd say, you haven't said they've got unlimited, yes, I have, and it's a contract now, so they have unlimited vacation. But this is in a country where when people start a job, they get 1 week's vacation or 2 weeks vacation, which is kind of stupid. And I suppose on average in the 10 years I was there, my planners took 4 weeks vacation each. Well, not a big deal. It's less than we take in Europe or Australia. But that was 4 weeks that enabled them to actually go away for 2 weeks at a time. Imagine that. To do things that were interesting, that made them more interesting and interested people. So I've always said, you've got to take your vacation, put a fictitious meeting in your calendar each day. If there's the pressure on the electronic calendar, put a meeting with Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so somewhere in there for an hour, because you can't go over the meeting that already exists. And just go out, get a cup of coffee, watch the world go by. And I think that's probably the most important thing you can ask for, is that time and that space, because today every pressure in our business is about always being connected and always being there and always reacting to things quickly. Just get a bit of space to react slowly. Actually think about your response. Sorry, that was a very long-winded question.
So an uncanny DJ link. So the APG can't offer unlimited holidays to you and vacations, unfortunately. However, it does have training, and I think there's some qual training happening for planners next week, actually. So if you want that sort of stuff, sort of go and check out the site, sort of show your planning directors and heads of planning, and sort of what you want, and help them help you, I guess, because there's a whole world of people that are sort of plugging into all of that sort of stuff. So,
and everybody here who works for WPP is going to be calling Martin tomorrow, saying, "Martin, John said I should have unlimited vacation."
I'm sure we've got time for one more question, and then might you be around for a cheeky drink afterwards?
Cheeky drink, yes.
Yeah.
Thanks. So it's good that you mentioned Martin, actually, John. My question would be, I agree 100% with everything you said, right? You can see from my accent that I'm not from the UK. I'm from Brazil, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And you were maybe the most, inspirational person, in my career. So it's really nice to be here and being able to attend this event. However, what is...
I knew there was I knew there was a however coming.
What's Martin, doing to help us to become planners again? Because I think this is one of the, biggest problems that we have in terms of how the industry has changed, and therefore the context changed, and what we do and how we do that has changed as well.
But
so, what the people in the leadership positions are doing and can do to help us, do the job properly again as well.
Well, I had a conversation with Martin 2 weeks ago. It was kind of weird. I was at the Chelsea Flower Show, and my phone rang, and that's a weird number. Who's that? And I said, he was, "Hey, it's Martin." And I was like, "Martin who?" And then I realised it was Martin, and we chatted for a while. And I said, "So how are things going?" And I said, "What's your biggest problem at the moment?" And he said, "It's cost cutting," and it's cost cutting. Cost cutting is a problem because it means we can't do our job properly, and it's got to a point where, as agencies, we're trying to solve problems with our hands tied behind our backs, and he knows this, and he fights it, and he fights it all of the time. Now, I know in a lot of agencies, people will say, "Oh well, we haven't got this, that, and the other, 'cause Martin won't let us." And whenever somebody says that to me, I say, "Well, have you asked him? Have you asked him?" And they always go, "No." "Well, no, you can't ask him." I go, "Well, ask him, call him, write to him." I tell you, if there's a good reason for doing something, he'll do it. It's just that all too often people don't ask him, they just assume he won't do it, and the question is never asked. So ask the questions.
There we go. Ask the questions, and what better way to end?
Go on, one more.
One more?
One more.
Go on.
One more.
Go on.
Go on. Just shout.
Yeah, I'm one of the reasons you're grumpy. Sorry, I've moved to an in-house planner.
Okay.
So the advantage is I'm really close to the research, but it's very hard to be objective. Any tips?
Go back and work in an agency.
Thought you might say that.
Sorry. No. No, I actually can't think of it. No, it's very, very hard when you're dealing with one thing all of the time. I've worked with toilet paper clients who, they just assume that in every waking hour other people think about toilet paper the same way they do. And I suppose the only advice I can give is the same one that I've just said about getting out of the office and spending time talking to real people. But not talking to them. Most of the research that's briefed by clients that I'm involved in is very focused, and it's, okay, here's what we want to look into about the category, and here's what the brand. Let's just go into it and talk about life, and just move it closer and closer and see where it naturally comes out, if it does naturally come out. And sometimes it doesn't naturally come out at all. That tells you something. And make sure that you're open to things outside of your category and your brand. I mean, when you're an in-house planner on certain brands, I think it's probably easier than being an in-house planner on other brands. You know, don't know what you do, but because you know some brands operate better in a more sort of horizontal way. There are others are so niche, so focused that it's hard to see the forest and the trees simultaneously. Thank you. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I'm sure there are other questions too, but in the interest of time, sort of urge you to stay behind, congregate, talk amongst yourself, fire some questions. A really thought-provoking, interesting, inspiring sort of set of questions and provocations and everything else. So thank you very much indeed, John.
Thank you.
And finally, just as a second DJ link, really following on from stuff that John talks about, we've got a session next week, which is called What's Love Got to Do With It? And it's all about Byron Sharp and advocacy and versus penetration. It's right here again, but go and get tickets if that sort of thing floats your boat. It'll be really interesting in association with Flamingo. Thanks very much.